Human beings aren't invincible. It is extremely easy to overwhelm our systems, autistic, traumatized, or not. If you don't like the things a person shouts at you or the way a person behaves towards you, consider that they are overwhelmed. Try not to let your victimhood trauma response convince you that they are just bad people who are out to target you. Every reaction stems from an action. Despite your good intentions, something you said or did may have been enough to immediately overwhelm a person who explodes at you. Consider for a moment that what you think is a harmless gesture your end is a harmful experience for the person on the other end. Good intentions are great and all, but you're only halfway there. What is the impact going to be like? By focusing on the impact, more than the intent, we can get a better idea of how harmful or harmless our gestures and remarks are. If you are a person trapped in victimhood, the person you regard as your attacker actually sees you as the attacker when you trigger them. Think about that for a moment. But because their reactions are seen by society as overreactions to triggers that society sees as harmless gestures or remarks, they will always be seen as the bad person or the attacker. This actually puts the person trapped in victimhood in a position of privilege. As I've discussed in previous posts on this topic, people trapped in victimhood are often willing to give up their victimhood status. This status is a guaranteed form of validation, attention, and sympathy. If the person trapped in victimhood was traumatized early on in life, it can be immensely difficult to move away from this status because it has become a cornerstone of their identity. Because victimhood status is so hard to move away from, and understandably so, the person trapped in victimhood will do everything in their power to keep alive the demonic image they have in their head of the person who hurt them. This means that the nuances and complexities of the situation pose direct threats to their internalized narrative. In order to keep the demonic image of the person who hurt them alive, they will swiftly reject any attempt by anyone to introduce a more balanced, detailed, and rational explanation for why a person may have hurt them. It is much safer for the person trapped in victimhood to see people who hurt them as horrible assholes, for example. That they could be traumatized, or a neurodivergent person in meltdown, would imply that the behavior of the person who hurt them was not within their control. This throws the person trapped in victimhood into a state of panic, because the complex reality of the situation contradicts the simplistic demonization narrative in their head. And this means that they now feel they have to renounce their self-worth's most valued lifeline, their victimhood status. These explanations will be countered with the victim's go-to phrase, "no excuse for bad behaviour," which can actually be translated to, "I refuse to tolerate an alternative narrative. I am safer here in my interpretation." Alternatively, the person trapped in victimhood will accuse the person who hurt them, or anyone who attempts alternative explanations, of gaslighting. By some definitions, it actually is gaslighting, because the victim's sense of reality, grasp on the situation, and perceptions do come under direct threat when they become the recipient of an alternative narrative. But is it not gaslighting on the part of the victim to relentlessly accuse the person who hurt them as an abusive scumbag who should know and do better, when the reality could be that they are neurodivergent, traumatized, melting down, and thus unable to control their behaviour? Yes, it can be horrific to be sworn at and physically attacked. You have my sympathy, people trapped in victimhood, and if you have been traumatized by this, I want to help you. But this is still, as people trapped in victimhood would say, no excuse to see a person who explodes at you as a bad person, when the reality is that they are a distressed person. The person you triggered into meltdown or rage attack is having a horrific experience too. It's time to be objective when it comes to these dynamics. Both sides are suffering and need help. If you need to attack someone who attacked you, you're part of the problem. The same goes to the person who hurt you, even if you triggered them. It would be worth their while taking responsibility and exploring their triggers and why they resort to such hostile behaviour. What can they control? The behaviour itself? Of course not. Meltdowns are involuntary. Can anything be controlled before this happens? Can you speak to a person who triggers you frequently? Are they open to discussion? Yes? Great. Discuss this without judgment for either person. No? Then perhaps this is a person you're going to have to distance yourself from, if possible. As I said in my last post, this is not an attack on victims. I am objectively analysing the victim-perpetrator dynamic, without a moral lens or slant. The word victim is absolutely valid in many contexts. People are the victims of violent crimes, for example. But please let it be known that in this recent video series, I am not discussing sexual assault or domestic violence. I'm talking about interactions between neurodivergent people. Victimhood is a response to trauma. People trapped in victimhood need to know what they can, need to do what they can to heal their trauma. Or, failing that, be aware that post-altercations, they can end up causing more harm and trauma through their collective revenge plots than the person who originally harmed them in the first place. Final point, these posts are not aimed at anyone or any group in particular. I'm inspired to write about this and speak about this issue because I observe this pattern unfolding again and again inside and outside the autistic community. It is actually part of a pushback against cancel culture, which is not exclusive to the autistic community.